Welcome and good morning, everyone. Now that it's nearly spring, after the longest winter anyone in California can remember, and I'm speaking figuratively, of course, the time feels right to talk about what we in California are doing and can do to take on climate change. This is the first in a series of webinars that Sustainable Conservation will offer this year, exploring our global food system and California's role in it. We wanted to put this webinar series together because food is critical to successfully addressing climate change. And based on Sustainable Conservation's experience over the past 25 years, we believe California and Californians like you and me can and must play a leading role. When we think about climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, most people think about oil and gas, transportation, manufacturing. What people don't realize is that agriculture accounts for about 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And if we don't start paying more attention to what we eat, and importantly don't eat, and how it's produced, it will contribute even more. The good news is that eating and farming done right can be part of the solution to climate change. And that's what we're going to explore over the next 5 months in Sustainable Conservation's Feeding the Future webinar series. Today, I'm going to provide a high-level overview of the important role our food system needs to play if we are to successfully combat climate change and other environmental challenges. And I'll set the stage for a series of subsequent webinars that will explore different aspects of our food system with a focus on what we can do here in California to lead the way. This is an ambitious and multifaceted topic, and we do not have all the answers, but we are excited to bring our experience along with the perspectives of many of the experts working on important issues like reducing food waste, as well as farmers who are pioneering sustainable practices here in California. We'll be hearing and learning from a variety of voices over the course of the next 5 months, so thank you for joining us. Before we get started, we'd love to see who's listening in today. So we've got 3 poll questions for you. Let's bring those up. Where are you calling in from? And where are you joining us from? And we've got several regions in California listed. The second question is what type of organization you work for and are associated with. And then the third is on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest, how would you rate your level of knowledge about the role the food system needs to play in addressing climate change? We'll give you a minute to fill those out. Great. I think that looks pretty good. Let's end the polling and see what we have. So we've got, not surprisingly, a lot of you joining us from the Bay Area, with 53% of you today, but we also have folks from out of state as well, about 17%. So welcome everyone. And then in terms of the type of organization, work with, we have kind of a variety, quite a few from the nonprofit sector, but also folks joining us from academia, agriculture, business, foundation, government, students, and then a group of other that we won't know exactly who you are. And then on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest, it looks like we have quite a number of folks that are quite knowledgeable about the role food system plays in addressing climate change, but also, you know, a variety of knowledge. So welcome everyone. We're really glad to have all of you. So today's talk, it's about 25 minutes and we'll definitely have time at the end for questions, but feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box at any time. So let's get started. I'm going to start with kind of the big picture. The world's population, which is about 7.8 billion today, is projected to grow to nearly 10 billion people by 2050. Experts say demand for food will increase by 50% to feed this growing population. So the problem is that we already use 1/3 of the Earth's surface to produce food. So the big challenge is how will we meet growing demand without destroying the planet? Not only does agriculture already produce 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions, but cutting down forests to create more farmland to grow food would destroy the lungs of our planet that absorb and sequester carbon and help stabilize our climate. To feed 10 million people without destroying the planet, we need to focus on 2 basic things: what we eat and don't eat, and how we produce what we eat. But before we get into all of that, let's take a moment to reflect on what the COVID-19 pandemic exposed about our food system over the past year and what that means for the future. We heard disturbing stories of meatpacking facilities where COVID spread rapidly among workers and plants shut down. We saw photos of crops rotting in fields because institutional supply chains and packaging could not pivot quickly to retail ones. And we viewed images of milk being dumped on the ground because universities and schools were no longer serving food. The pandemic highlighted existing problems and exacerbated them, so they became impossible to ignore. Climate change is doing the same. Many of the vulnerabilities that made their way onto the front pages during the early stages of the pandemic are the same ones posed by the changing climate. The impacts of climate change are more immediate and severe than even pessimistic models predicted. And with the world's population growing rapidly, the world needs a new approach to what we eat and how we produce it. The pandemic has forced Americans to take a hard look at where our food comes from, how it gets to us, who handles it along the way, at what cost to public health, how it is grown, processed, and distributed, at what cost to the environment, who plants it, picks it, transports, processes, cooks, and delivers it, and at what human cost. Whether viewed through the lens of climate change, public health, or social and racial equity, we have to take a hard look at our food system. By working with nature and prioritizing environmental and equity outcomes, along with business imperatives, we can add resilience to the food supply chain and at the same time produce nutritious foods in ways that are less harmful to the planet. At Sustainable Conservation, we take a holistic and balanced approach to the complex challenges of managing California's land, air, and water sustainably. We believe that good environmental solutions must be just and also make economic sense, and we develop evidence-based, pragmatic solutions for using natural resources that are designed to benefit people and wildlife. And we do this in collaboration with a wide range of science, environmental, business, and farming leaders. So let's start with California. California is a good place to center our reassessment of the costs and benefits of farming in all dimensions. Our economy feeds and leads the nation. with more than our agricultural economy. With more than 77,000 farms growing 400 different commodities, California supplies the world with more food than all but 4 nations. No other state, even combination of states, can match California's food output per acre. As a nutrient superpower, California is the dominant producer of some of the world's most nutritious and valuable crops. California grows 2/3 of the country's fruits and nuts, 1/3 of the vegetables, and provides the nation with 20% of its dairy products. California is the largest producer of almonds and the second largest producer of pistachios in the world. We also grow nearly all of the nation's cauliflower, celery, figs, dates, walnuts, and olive oil, just to name a few of the 400 crops we grow in the state. This nutritional abundance matters a lot right now, and here's why. First, the world needs to feed 10 billion people by the year 2050, a challenge by any measure at a time when the Earth's population is increasing by close to 100 million people a year and is driven by growth in some of the world's poorest countries. Second, feeding the world is not just about calories. It's about nutrition, human health, and well-being. We need more nutritious food quickly and in the right places. According to the World Resources Institute, overall food demand is on course to increase by more than 50%. The nutrient-dense commodities California produces in such abundance are crucial to that effort. Third, farming in California can serve as a model in developing methods to produce food in ways that are environmentally sustainable and relatively affordable to the consumer. California farmers have pioneered best practices in terms of water efficiency and are developing scalable practices to better protect natural resources. And I'm going to go into each of these factors in greater detail. Of course, some of the factors that account for California's farming abundance are place-based and can't be easily replicated. As one of Earth's 5 Mediterranean climate zones, California is a grower's paradise. Sunny days, cool nights, mild winters, lots of sun, and long growing seasons, along with rich soil, advanced water diversion, and irrigation systems that help compensate for limited summer rainfall. And of course, world-class public research universities and scientists, and major agricultural regions such as the San Joaquin, Salinas, Napa, and Sonoma Valleys that are close to population centers. Importantly, there are also mistakes to be avoided from California's example. This productive bounty has come at considerable environmental costs, compounded by the impacts of climate change. The major limiting factor is water. Our comfortable Mediterranean climate means rainfall is concentrated during the winter and spring, resulting in arid conditions during summer and fall, and it must support a population of nearly 40 million people. Our groundwater aquifers have been severely overdrawn to make up for the years when there was not enough rain and snow. Groundwater overdraft has left 1 million Californians without access to drinking water, and those 1 million Californians are largely Latinx and living in some of the poorest parts of the state. Farmland over these aquifers is subsiding at alarming rates, especially in the San Joaquin Valley. This photo illustrates one example of the infrastructure, in this case, the California Aqueduct, being damaged by that subsidence. California urgently needs to find ways to store water so that seasonal rains and snowfall melt can be captured for use in drought years. And there are other challenges. Irrigation runoff from farms causes water quality problems in rivers and streams, and fertilizer use has contaminated groundwater. Air quality in our most productive farming region of the state, the San Joaquin Valley, is among the worst in the country. And climate change is making things worse. California will experience more frequent and intense droughts, interspersed with more extreme weather events that will cause flooding, as well as longer and more deadly wildfire seasons. Warming temperatures have also shifted the ranges of plants, animals, pests, and diseases. So now let's talk about the 2 key factors to having a sustainable, climate-friendly food system. Achieving the goal of producing enough nutritious food for 10 million people by 2050 without destroying the planet mainly comes down to 2 key factors. what we eat and don't eat, and how it is produced. So let's talk first about the what. Even though the world's population is growing, we don't need to double the amount of food we produce. We need to double the amount of food available. Available is the key word here. In the near term, the world's food production is sufficient to provide for all, but it doesn't reach everyone who needs it. Before the pandemic, an estimated $1 trillion of food production ended up lost or wasted. The World Wildlife Fund has calculated that that comes out to 1.3 billion tons of food wasted each year, which is 4 times the amount needed to feed the more than 800,000 million people in the world who live with food insecurity. According to ReFed, a nonprofit focused on food waste, in 2019, 35% of all food produced in the United States went unsold or uneaten. A small percentage is donated to food banks, but the vast majority is food waste. So we've got another poll question for you. Let's pull that up. What percentage of food happens in our homes in the United States? And your options are 10%, 25%, 37%, 50%, and 67%. Right, so I'm going to end this polling. So for those of you, the majority of you got the answer right. It is indeed 37%. And of that food, of the food wasted in the United States, 37% was the result of food going into the garbage at home rather than providing nourishment. And importantly, it is not just the food that's wasted. Food waste also squanders the agricultural land and water resources that went into producing it. And producing that food that went to waste generates roughly a quarter of all the agricultural greenhouse gas emissions around the world. So think about it. Imagine instead of pumping gasoline into the tank of your car, it was instead spilled onto the ground at the service station. We've got to get more food from farm to fork before it is lost in processing, transportation, or distribution along our very long supply chain, or otherwise wasted after it reaches the consumer. In addition to reducing waste, we need to shift the diets of high meat-eating consumers toward plant-based foods. As incomes grow across the developing world, overall food demand is on course to increase by more than 50%, and demand for animal-based foods by nearly 70%. As nations urbanize and incomes rise above poverty levels, diets tend to become more varied and Western, which means high in sugar, fats, refined carbohydrates, meat, and dairy. For every food calorie generated, animal-based foods require many more feed and land inputs and emit far more greenhouse gases than plant-based foods. For example, beef accounts for roughly half of land use and greenhouse gas emissions associated with American diets, but it provides only 3% of calories. So shifting from beef toward plant-based protein or even chicken or pork would produce significant environmental benefits. Livestock, especially ruminants such as cattle, sheep, and goats, require more land to deliver the same nutritional benefits because livestock need land for pasture, in addition to the land used to grow the feed crops like corn and soy. Ultimately, to feed a growing population and preserve forests that can absorb carbon and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, we will need to produce more food without using more land. And one way to do that is for people to increase our consumption of plant-based diets. So we've got a last poll question for you. Let's bring that one up. How much do you think consumers worldwide would need to reduce their consumption of meat in order to avoid converting more land from wildlife habitat to agriculture? And you've got 4 options here. Okay, let's close that polling. So for those of you the majority of you say it's 2/3, and actually I have good news for you because the actual answer is 1/3. If consumers worldwide shifted even 1/3 of their expected consumption of ruminant meat by 2050 to plant-based proteins, no more land would have to be converted from wildlife habitat to agricultural use, and far fewer greenhouse gas emissions would need to be eliminated. So that's the what to eat and not eat of this talk, and we'll dive into this more with food waste and diet experts in a future webinar. Now, let's look at how we grow food. The single most important need for a sustainable food future is boosting the natural resource efficiency of agriculture. That is, producing more food per acre, per animal, per pound of fertilizer, and per gallon of water. According to the World Resources Institute, if today's level of production efficiency were to remain constant through 2050, then feeding the planet would entail clearing most of its remaining forests for crop and pasture land, which would wipe out thousands more species and release enough greenhouse gas emissions to exceed the warming targets enshrined in the Paris Agreement. And that's even if emissions from all other human activities were entirely eliminated. So the status quo is definitely not an option. Fortunately, California is a global agricultural leader when it comes to efficiency, and California can continue to improve and have new lessons to share about how we grow abundant food while also protecting and restoring natural resources and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Over the past 2 decades, for example, California almond farmers have successfully reduced the amount of water used to grow a pound of almonds by 33% through improved production practices and using more efficient micro-irrigation technology. Some of you might remember that we talked about almonds and water use in our Water 101 webinar last year, which you can find on our website. Dairies have also reduced their water use. Water used per unit of milk produced has decreased more than 88%, primarily due to improved feed crop production and water use efficiency. At Sustainable Conservation, we have an impressive track record in California of bringing people together to design, test, and scale innovative solutions, working with farmers, scientists, and environmental experts. California dairies are leading the way with methane digesters and other manure management practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Last year, we were part of a partnership that received the US and California Dairy Sustainability Awards for our work on a first-of-its-kind irrigation system that helps dairy producers use the manure their cows produce to hydrate their feed crops in ways that protect water quality and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We are also working with our partners to help farmers manage groundwater more sustainably and to successfully implement California's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. One technique is using active and fallow farmland to take floodwaters in high water years to percolate into the groundwater aquifers below. This and other strategies will be a model for other agricultural regions who have also overdrafted their aquifers. Our approach is pragmatic, collaborative, and science-based, and the results are tangible. We have shown it is possible to grow abundant, healthy food and at the same time protect and restore natural resources and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I wish it had not taken this pandemic to make people aware of how fragile and overextended our food supply chain is, but this tragic moment found us, and we have to learn all we can from it so that we can build a better future. We can design ways to increase and improve future food supplies, transportation, and distribution in ways that are more sustainable, secure, and humane. We live in a time that demands a change mindset in so many ways: public health, racial justice, economy, environment, and climate. And I'm confident that California can serve as a model for a planet that needs more nutrition superpowers. So what can you do to help in this effort? You can support these practices through your own habits as a consumer or even as a gardener, doing your part to restore the habitat for native bees and other pollinators, and by reducing water and food waste in your home and place of business. Seek out producers who are recognized for their land stewardship, like our Leopold Conservation Award winners, who can also be found on our website. Our annual Leopold Conservation Award recognizes a California farmer or rancher for outstanding stewardship of natural resources. You will be hearing from some of our winners in this webinar series and the pioneering practices they are using, which show us the way to a sustainable, climate-friendly food system. And continue to be an educated Californian through webinars such as the one in this series. Next up is a conversation with California's Secretary of Agriculture, Karen Ross, and author of The Dreamt Land, Mark Arax, about water and agriculture in California. After that, we have a series of webinars diving deeper into food waste, plant-forward diets, production efficiency, soil health, and more. So please visit our website at suscon.org or follow us on social media for more information. And while you're on our website, you can also learn about the practices that will allow us to manage California's natural resources sustainably. So the huge and painful changes we are living through have shown us how interconnected we all are. Regardless of where we live, what we look like, or what language we speak, our health, our well-being, and our resilience are deeply connected with each other and with the health of our shared resources and climate. At Sustainable Conservation, we are all about bringing people together, and this is an essential time to do that on behalf of California, our country, and the earth that we all call home. So thank you. And now I'd love to open it up to questions. Let's see, let me get rid of this. And I encourage anybody who has questions to put them into the Q&A box. Let's see, there's one question. I'm just going to read it so at the same time. The question I can keep for next webinar, I just saw Mark Arax will be talking. Here it is, if there's a time to touch upon it. I recently finished The Current Dreamt Land, Chasing Water and Dust Across California by Mark Arax, and my mind has been digesting the history and actions it traced of California water usage. With the upcoming enforcement of the Groundwater Act, what checks will be placed for large producers, including investment firms, to not game the system? I was surprised when I read how large producers increased cropland during California's recent droughts because of the increase in water efficiency and irrigation. They planted on bad soil because they have the water to make the plants grow. That's a great question, and we'll definitely bring that up on the next webinar with Karen and Mark. I will say you're absolutely right that actually becoming more efficient didn't necessarily lead to less water being used, because farmers were able to expand the land they grew on, including to more marginal, less good soil land, because they could irrigate it. Sustainable Groundwater Management Act does definitely change that, because now it is a requirement that we bring our groundwater basins into balance. So that should end, and hopefully we'll be making a difference. Okay. So another question, what is the potential for sequestering carbon in California ag soils? What R&D needs to take place to achieve this potential? That is a great question, Steve Schaefer. And that's actually something that Sustainable Conservation is spending some time looking at now. There's been some excellent work by the Marin Carbon Project and others showing what carbon can be sequestered by using compost in soil. We're looking at what can be sequestered realistically in a place like the San Joaquin Valley with the climate there. And in fact, we're going to dedicate a whole webinar specifically to soil health and bring some experts on. So hopefully we'll be able to do a better job of addressing your question than I just did. Let's see, let me look in the chat to see if there are any questions there. Does sustainable conservation support and promote regenerative agricultural practices? That includes no-till practices, rotating crops, cover crops, compost, and no chemical fertilizing. We definitely support and promote some of those we support all of those regenerative agricultural practices, and we've actively worked on several of them, including no-till. We did a lot of work with UC California and Cooperative Extension on promoting something called conservation tillage, which is a way that farmers can, instead of clearing the land after harvest of all the plant residue, they can leave that residue on and plant their next crops into it. And it reduces it leaves a lot more of the, the plant cover on the ground, which greatly reduces dust and soil erosion, but it also reduces tractor passes, which is a very good greenhouse gas benefit. And we're also definitely promoting and have done a lot of work on compost. And we'll talk more about that in the soil health webinar. Let's see, do you know if there's a set deadline for having residential water metering for all households in California to address current inequity of water use and charging practices throughout the state? Does this include those on rural wells, individual and community? That's a good question that I can't answer. We can see if we can find the answer and get back to you. I know a lot of residential households have water metering, but not all. And I think it's a very important thing to have because, as everyone likes to say, you can't manage what you can't measure. So that's an important thing to do. And I just don't know the answer to that question. Let me see if I've got any others. What options are there for creating more water storage in the state? So the biggest option for creating water storage in the state is to take advantage of California's vast underground aquifers. There are estimates that our groundwater aquifers can store at least 3 times as much water as all of our above reservoirs combined. So there's a huge opportunity to figure out how to get more water into those groundwater aquifers and use them as almost like a bank. You fill them up in wet years so that you can draw on them in dry years and not have to rely on surface water as much, which is when rivers and streams most desperately need them. So groundwater aquifers are really a huge opportunity in groundwater storage. Okay, any other questions? Let's see, I'm going to go back to the Q&A box. Okay, is there an entity, a nonprofit, government, or private that is promoting best practices across states so we can accelerate adoption and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase resource efficiency factor? That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think there are a lot of groups promoting these practices, actually both nonprofits that work with agriculture. And I think also, certainly, actually, I should say, United States Department of Agriculture, the Natural Resources Conservation Service is a huge, actually, I should have thought of that immediately, is just a huge entity for promoting best practices across states, providing technical assistance to farmers and providing cost share assistance. I'm going to go to the next question. Has there been any progress on identifying and using native cover crops? That's a great question. And I don't know. I think that's a great question for our webinar we're going to do on soil health. So please tune back in for that one, and we'll make sure to ask this. Next question. USDA SARE funds over $30 million per year on sustainable ag research in the United States. What does Sustainable Conservation think the focus of these grants should be? There's a lot of important focuses, but I would definitely say that soil health and what the things that soil health can accomplish, both in terms of sequestering carbon, but also one of the things we're really interested in understanding better is the benefits of improved soil health practices for retaining water. It's particularly important in California, where water is such a precious commodity. So that is one area of focus we'd really love to see grants in. Okay, next question. Thanks, keep them coming, folks. Please comment on the relative impacts of increased groundwater pumping versus mandated environmental flows under ESA. So let me see if I get this question right or not, but I think what the questioner is asking, well, let me step back. So one of the reasons we think groundwater storage is so important is that it is during droughts when farmers need to pump from groundwater in particular, because there is less water available in our rivers and streams. So rivers and streams, they need water during those dry years for fish, many of which are threatened and endangered. And I guess that's one of the reasons we're bullish on groundwater storage. I will also say one of the things we are learning in our work with the Department of Water Resources and doing some modeling and connecting climate scenarios for runoff in watersheds, looking at how you can spread that water out across the land to percolate into the groundwater, and then connecting that to groundwater models. We're actually showing that, or we're actually seeing in the modeling that groundwater recharge can actually help. The water seeps underground and helps and goes back into the river, supporting those river flows. So groundwater recharge can actually help in a number of different ways in trying to support fish and wildlife in rivers. So I hope I answered that question. Chuck, if I didn't, email me and we can talk about it further. Okay, any other questions? Feel free to put them in the, I think I've got, oops, bear with me. How much can buildings help with this issue, such as on-site rainwater harvesting and storage, green roofs, vertical green edible walls, previous pavement, etc.? Great question. Definitely not my area of expertise. So that one, we'll have to look for another resource to help you answer on that. I'm sure there is definitely, they can help. I just don't know how much. Excellent. Any more questions? Let's see. Good. I see another one just popped in. Are there incentives to bank in high precipitation years for the Groundwater Act when people would want to conserve less? Great question. And in fact, that is being worked on right now. So the Groundwater Sustainable Management Act created groundwater sustainability agencies, and those agencies are coming up with plans of how to sustainably manage their basins, so they're not taking out more water than they're putting back in over time. And one of the things that's being looked at is how to increase groundwater recharge to increase supply during those high water years. And they do need to think about and are thinking about incentives. So in some cases, we work with the Madera Irrigation District, for instance, and what they did was offer water for free as a way to incentivize farmers to take and accept that water for recharge. We have heard of some cases where farmers will actually get paid to do the recharge because they do take on some risk. But I think all those incentive options are in the works right now to figure out how to optimize groundwater recharge. So it's a great question. I'm going to give it a few more moments to see if anyone has any additional questions. And if not, I really want to thank everyone for joining us. We really appreciate the time you took on this important topic, and I really do encourage you to tune in for future webinars. There's a series of them, and we're going to have some terrific experts and farmers to talk with and ask questions of. So with that, thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day.